Okay, let's unpack this. We're jumping straight into a deep dive today on a question that comes right out of the source material you shared. And it really highlights the nuts and bolts of how government is structured. Does the Florida Constitution require the governor to interact directly with individual citizens?
It's a great question. It sounds simple, maybe, but like your source material shows, the answer is really tied directly to the fundamental design principles in the state constitution itself.
Yeah.
It's less about personal preference and much more about those foundational duties.
Exactly. And this analysis you sent, it's a fantastic way to explore this. It looks really closely at the Florida Constitution, right? Focusing on Article 4 for the executive branch and Article 3 for the legislature.
Right. And it uses that specific real-world example, the whole advocacy situation, after the veto of HB 6017.
To really make the point.
Yeah, to illustrate the practical implications of these constitutional differences.
So our mission here is to kind of walk through this analysis together. We'll figure out what the Constitution actually says the governor has to do, see how that stacks up against what the source says is understood about a legislator's role.
Right, your contrast.
And pull out the key insights. Why does this structural difference matter so much, especially for advocacy?
Exactly. And hopefully by the end, you'll have a much clearer picture of where different parts of Florida's government get their, let's say, marching orders from, and why engaging with them might need, well, different strategies.
Okay, so the source kicks off with that core question. Is there actually a constitutional duty for the governor to interact directly with the people?
It dives right in.
Yeah.
And the approach it takes is pretty direct. It goes straight to the text. A textual review of the Florida Constitution.
Right. It's all about what the law requires, not just what people might expect or want. And it starts by digging into Article 4.
Yep. Article 4, which lays out the powers and duties of the executive branch, which is, headed by the governor.
So what does the source highlight there?
Well, what the source really emphasizes from Article 4, Section 1, is that it's heavily focused on the governor's role as the state's chief administrator, the manager, the law enforcer.
Okay.
Think about duties related to running the machinery of state government, making sure laws are actually carried out.
So like being the chief executive, commander-in-chief of the state militia, that kind of thing.
Exactly. The Constitution literally says he must take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
Okay.
And it lists other duties: commissioning officers, transacting necessary business with government officials, requiring information in writing from those officers.
Right.
Being the chief administrative officer, responsible for state planning and budgeting.
It also mentions initiating judicial proceedings against officers sometimes, and asking the Supreme Court for opinions on constitutional questions.
Yes, specifically on questions that affect his executive powers. And summoning the militia, informing the legislature about the state's condition.
That's the State of the State address, usually.
Typically, yeah, at least once per regular session. And filling vacancies in office. According to the source, this is the heart of the governor's constitutional job description in Article 4.
And this is where the source makes that really critical observation, right? After listing all these specific executive, administrative, enforcement duties.
Exactly. The analysis points out that Article 4 is, well, conspicuously silent. There's nothing in there requiring the governor to engage in direct personal interaction with private citizens.
So no mandate to respond to constituents like a legislator might?
Not in Article 4, no. The framework described there is all about executing laws and managing the state government itself.
Okay, that distinction feels really important. So how does the source then contrast this with the legislature, which is under Article 3?
Well, this is where the picture really shifts. While Article 4 sets up this executive focused on administration, Article 3, governing the legislature, inherently creates a representative link to the people.
Because legislators are elected from specific districts, geographically defined areas.
Precisely. The source notes they are fundamentally understood. It's sort of baked into the system to represent the interests of the people living in those particular districts.
And the source connects this to how the legislature actually operates.
It does. It points to the very structure of legislative work. Things like public committee hearings where citizens can come and testify.
Right.
The fact that legislators usually have constituent service offices, the general expectation that they'll respond to emails and calls from people back home. The source calls this an open and responsive design that's just woven into the legislative role.
So the source is really drawing a pretty sharp line here, based directly on the Constitution. You've got an executive function focused on statewide administration
Yep.
versus a legislative function rooted in geographic representation.
That's the core argument it's making. Legislators are, structurally designed to be representatives of their local areas.
Yeah.
And their expected responsiveness, things like holding town halls, answering mail, maybe introducing bills that constituents ask for, that flows directly from that representative role.
Whereas the governor, in the source's reading of the Constitution, is a statewide constitutional officer. His authority is over the executive branch and its operations.
Exactly. It's not a representative function in that same legislative sense, dealing with individual constituents from a specific district.
The source even brings in the governor's oath of office, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, from Article 2, Section 5B. The oath is to support, protect, and defend the Constitution and government of the United States and of the state of Florida.
And the analysis uses that to emphasize what?
That the oath binds the governor to uphold the law and the structure of government itself. It's distinct from, say, a constitutional duty to engage directly, one-on-one, with individual citizens about their personal concerns.
Okay, so pulling all this constitutional analysis together, the source's conclusion on whether there's a specific duty for the governor to interact directly with people seems pretty clear-cut.
It is. The source basically finds no provision anywhere in the Florida Constitution that imposes such a duty. No requirement to interact directly with citizens or manage constituent communications as part of his core constitutional job.
His constitutional obligations, as the source lays them out again, are those big executive functions. Executing laws, overseeing state officers, doing the state of the state, proposing budgets, signing or vetoing bills.
Right. And his accountability to the people, according to this analysis, is primarily electoral.
Meaning through voting.
Yes, you hold him accountable at the ballot box.
Right.
And it's also institutional. His power isn't absolute. It's shaped and constrained by the legal and governmental framework.
But not, as the source puts it, individual or dialogical.
Right. Meaning he doesn't have a specific constitutional mandate to sit down and have a personal chat or debate with every citizen or group who wants his attention.
And this structural distance, as the Constitution defines it, leads us right into the source's discussion of practical implications and the lesson in civics. This is where it connects the theory to real-world advocacy.
Exactly. The source uses this understanding of the governor's role being about executing law, managing the state, not acting as a personal representative, to explain why some advocacy approaches might not work well when aimed at the governor's office.
Especially appeals based mainly on, say, moral arguments or demands for personal meetings.
Precisely. As the source puts it, the governor is not a voice of the people, as representatives are, but the guardian of the executive's interest in statewide governance. He can listen, sure, but the Constitution doesn't compel him to respond to every individual plea.
And this is where that specific example, the advocacy after the veto of HB 6017, comes in. The source really zooms in on the reaction from advocates then.
It does. It points to things like the accusations made, the very public demands to meet with us or hear our stories.
And the source argues that this kind of reaction shows, what? A misunderstanding.
A fundamental misunderstanding, it suggests, of the governor's actual constitutional position and duties. It even implies that these advocates might have benefited from, well, reading the Constitution first to grasp the nature of the office they were trying to influence.
Okay, let's dig into that a bit more. Why does the source say that particular advocacy strategy failed in that instance?
Well, the analysis suggests the approach was maybe driven more by emotion, by rhetoric, perhaps even by public performance.
Rather than strategy.
Rather than by a strategy grounded in how the governor's role is constitutionally defined.
So demands like, meet with us, or listen to the families. The source calls those politically performative, not legally grounded.
That's the phrasing, yeah. Meaning they were demands based on political expectations or desires, but not on any actual legal or constitutional obligation the governor has.
And the source really underscores the governor's position in that context.
Right. It points out his veto power is absolute, unless the legislature overrides it. Simple as that. He's not constitutionally required to be a channel for individual grievances or provide personal redress. He doesn't even have to give reasons for a veto beyond his official veto message to the legislature.
And crucially,
under the Constitution, he doesn't owe anyone a personal meeting or audience. He can choose to grant one, but it's not a requirement.
So the source concludes that by maybe misdirecting their efforts and not fully understanding the constitutional playing field,
these advocates, essentially, wasted time and energy. They might have even alienated potential allies and lost opportunities for maybe more effective, strategically sound ways to pursue their goals.
Which brings us right to the source's broader takeaway lesson, the lesson on civics and effective advocacy.
Yes, which is pretty stark, actually. It argues that successful movements for political change, they absolutely require understanding the specific system you're trying to change.
You can't rely only on outrage or emotion.
Right. Those can be powerful motivators, but they aren't enough on their own. The source frames the outcome around HB 6017 not just as, an exercise of the governor's power, but also in part as a consequence of what it calls strategic ignorance.
Strategic ignorance.
Meaning the failure of those advocating to really learn and respect the established constitutional rules of engagement for that particular office, the governor's office.
So, again, the source isn't knocking the passion or the emotion behind the advocacy.
Not at all. But it's making a really strong case for needing knowledge, needing precision, needing a disciplined strategy that's actually grounded in understanding the real roles and powers defined in the government structure.
Knowing the constitutional playing field as the source sees it is basically step one if you want to play the game effectively.
That seems to be the bottom line, yeah.
All right, let's just circle back then and really nail down the core insight from this deep dive into your source material.
I think what the analysis really hammers home is the constitutional basis for the Florida governor's role. It's fundamentally executive, it's statewide, it's centered on executing laws and managing the state administration.
Which is really distinct from that representative district-focused role of a legislator.
Exactly. A role that structurally, inherently, involves more direct citizen interaction.
And the source argues pretty forcefully that understanding this specific constitutional difference is just crucial.
Yeah, crucial for anyone hoping to engage effectively with different parts of the government. You need to know who you're talking to, constitutionally speaking, especially when comparing the executive branch to the legislative branch.
Which leaves us with this final thought for you, the listener, pulled right from the source's main theme. Considering the source's argument that understanding these distinct constitutional roles is essential for effective advocacy, how might the difference between the governor's executive function and a legislator's representative function reshape how you think about engaging with the different parts of your government on issues you care about?